Most people don't think of strategy that way.
Developing a new strategy.
Strategic blind spots.
When strategy meets reality.
Strategy and innovations.
In the strategy world.
Drive their strategic goals.
And welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. Welcome back to Strategy Meets Reality podcast. I'm delighted to have Jurriaan Kamer with me today. It's great to have you on. We got connected by a mutual connection, so I'm really thankful for that. But so for our listeners, you mind giving a bit of background and a bit of context about what you've been up to lately?
Sure, yeah. I am an organizational accelerator, and that takes all sorts of forms and shapes. I live in the Netherlands, but I work worldwide with leadership teams to get from strategy to actual day-to-day focus faster. Also a keynote speaker and author of 2 business books.
Oh, okay, cool. What are those books called?
So my first one is, and we're going to talk about that today as well, is Formula One Inspired. It's a business fable I co-authored with Rini van Soningen, and it's called Formula X. And my second book, which is been out for a bit over a year now, is called Unblock.
Yes, cool. And I'll put the links to those on the show notes so people can get direct access to that. So that's great. So that's really interesting, especially when you're talking about helping organizations get from strategy to execution. So we pick up on that. So how do you find that in organizations?
Yeah, that's the secret question, right? The $1 million question. Yeah, I think there's all sorts of moments in the strategy life cycle where things can go wrong, where it's not delivering what it needs to deliver. It starts with strategic orientation. Like, do we actually understand the situation that we're in, and do we understand the obstacles that we need to overcome to win? Then secondly, it's all about formulating, which is like, what is the thing that we're going to do? What is the choice we're going to make, and how we're going to write it down so people understand what the choice is all about. That's something we help leaders with a lot. Like, you talk a lot about that in your show, that how many companies actually don't have a strategy, but they call it strategy. It's either fluff or marketing or wish lists or whatever. So yeah, that's the thing. Like, what is the actual strategic intent here, and how can we articulate the trade-offs in a way so that everyone actually can translate that into day-to-day work? And then on the third level, it's all about activation. So we tend to talk about cascading the strategy. It's a term that I really dislike.
Yeah,
because it's all about water flowing down as a cascade. It never flows up. But activation is really about getting people that are doing the work to understand it and to integrate it into their day-to-day work.
Yes, it's important. I've written about this around the interpretation. So it's all, people think it's just a communication problem, and they just amplify stuff, and it's normally nonsense stuff. I'm going to be cynical, but actually, what you're talking about there is how do you make that space for interpretation so that they got clear intent, they have a space to understand it, and if you understand it, then they can then understand, well, okay, well, what part what's actually required of me?
Right.
To execute this.
Yeah, I think the big distinction there is that the communication bit is all about broadcasting. But the thing is that what we need is dialogue, right?
Yes.
It's actually having a conversation with each other to create mutual understanding of what's meant. And you can perfect your deck, you can perfect the words, but ultimately it's about having a conversation with the teams and the people that are executing and understanding their realities and taking in their feedback when you the choices that you want to make.
Yes.
And that feedback is also often missing. Like the cascade is often done through middle management layers, which is like a practical thing to get cascading done quickly. It maybe sounds very efficient, but it's not so effective, right? The more effective way that I've seen leaders do is having daily lunch sessions with people all across the organization, right? Really being close to the teams, going to the teams rather than inviting the teams to some kind of town hall presentation, right? It's the opposite direction. The other thing that is really helpful to think about is like, it's not like alignment is important, but the process is actually self-alignment. And that's close to your phrase of interpretation, because it is interpretation. And then it's like, okay, now I kind of get it. How do I align myself now to this new reality rather than I'm just going to hear what my priorities are from my boss, It's a very different thing.
And then what tends to happen for that then is they just post-rationalize whatever they're doing anyway and justify it towards there. But that's what you brought on, I think, is really good and overlooked, is that there's that power distance all the time in organization. We know that the shorter the power distance is perceived, the better. You get more dialogue. I suppose this is where you'll get more trust and of outcomes such as safety. And it doesn't just happen. You've got to go there. And I see a lot of organizations when they're trying to do a new transformation or something, they do the same thing. They bring like all Teams calls. So all on Teams call, all these people. Yeah, and there's broadcasting stuff, and they're wondering why no one's actually getting involved. Yeah, the big town halls where I'm like, well, especially if you've got perceived low power, or far
high distance. Yeah,
high distance. That's the word. Actually, getting up close and going to them and have that smaller group to allow that dialogue, I think is really important. It can start to build up that trust.
Yeah, and it also shouldn't happen after the executive team made a decision. It should happen earlier, or it should happen constantly. Actually, it's not like, because sometimes this process starts after the executive team have set the new strategy, and I put in Dutch we say a strik on it, which is like we put a tie on it, a bow tie or whatever it is. And it's like it's done, it's wrapped. Now the only thing we need to do is getting it into people's hands and hearts and hands, But actually, what should happen is that this strategy should be influenced through day-to-day conversations. If you have an early idea of a potential choice, especially if those choices are like tough trade-offs between two things that you really want at the same time, this is the moment to start talking to people to understand the reality. And you can put earlier, like, unformed ideas to them, like, hey, what would happen if we would make this trade-off? What would it work? Would it really help you? Do you think that would be smart, or am I missing something? So, and I think you had Julia on the show as well, Julia Houts at one point, and she's all about open strategy, which I really believe in too. It's like getting as much minds on your strategy as possible, because ultimately the people that are doing the work, they are in contact with the customers. They are in contact with the reality of the day to day, and the executives are not. They're always basing their decisions on filtered information. So yeah, you better just be there on the front lines rather than the other way around.
Exactly. That comes back to that feedback loop that you said. That feedback loop doesn't just happen once you've executed strategy. It's a consistent feedback loop, getting to the edges of the organization. And I think some leaders are, and I think we might have even brought this up on Julia's episode, but I think some leaders are afraid of what they may hear. But also, I think more relevant to this, I think leaders are afraid to tell or give a hint of what may be happening because they don't want to, that fear of sort of repercussions, especially I do a lot of stuff in heavily unionized organizations. There's that fear that if we say anything, then it has to be public, and it causes a lot of upset. Yeah. And this, I think, especially in unionized environments, I mean, the union is ultimately something to counter the power of the top, because apparently we cannot really trust that people at the top. We have to somehow form kind of a counterpower, So I'm absolutely not against unions, but I'm just making the point that if you are able to build a culture where leaders are constantly in touch with everyone, and you have really good conversations all the time, and you have good understanding and good mutual trust, and you treat your people well, then you don't have to be afraid of the unions, right? It's ultimately just a board of people that are helping you steer the ship in a good direction, and having all the stakeholder interests. But yeah, if you're really thinking about laying off half of the company, maybe this is not the good way to approach it. But like for 80% of the strategies, or maybe hopefully a lot more than that, you're not doing this radical steering of direction, right? So yeah, that's how I would think about it. And the other thing is, like, the strategy is not something that's only happening at the top. It should be everywhere. Like, strategy everywhere is a phrase I'm using more and more, because I often hear people in the teams like, the strategy is not for us. Like, we don't set a strategy. Why should we set a strategy? We just hear what the strategy is. I'm like, no, actually, if we talk about self-alignment, what you're doing is that you are figuring out what is our part in the bigger picture. And if this is the overarching strategy, what is our strategy then to achieve our purpose within this assignment or this mandate or this part of the organization that we sit in? And so the strategic thinking could actually happen in every layer of the organization. Yeah. And it really highlights the point you made earlier around, getting people involved. You said they put a bow on it and then just sort of throw it over the wall. But the thing is with that is that everyone worries, and I see it a lot of the time when I engage with clients, they worry about it being perfectly clear. Mm-hmm. Like, how, is it clear enough? Is it this? Yeah. And I keep saying to it doesn't need to be, because you just need to give what you want. Allow them to figure out how that self-alignment you're talking about. They all know how to deliver it. You don't need to worry about the how. The interpretation, the conversation, they will soon tell you if this is, bit beyond or there's constraints, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
But you just want them to have that clear, like you said, self-alignment with it and enable them to figure out, because with the strategy, we're always talking about that, the balance between status quo and change.
Mm-hmm.
They're always trying to wrestle with stuff they have to deliver today, plus the new direction, and they'll balance that tension out, but you just need to give them the freedom to be able to do that.
Yeah. And there might be many teams in the organizations where the new strategy doesn't affect them at all. You still need a group of people cleaning. Still a group of people that are cleaning the office, that won't really change. Like maybe HR processes will roughly stay the same. Maybe, especially some of these support functions, they don't necessarily need to change a lot. So don't bother them too much with it, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of you have to be intentional and deliberate of where you're going to put your effort in that sense. The thing I've seen working really well is to create a sort of marketplace where after the leaders have said, this is the direction, these are the choices we're making, this is what we're not going to do, and this is what we want to do. And having this invitation of, okay, after hearing this, can you tell me what it will mean for you day to day? Can you tell me what that will change for your objectives day to day? And present that to each other, and having this kind of marketplace where leaders walk around and teams hear also from each other what they're going to do. And that creates this sense, this is the sense making of the new direction. And maybe that means that we have to close down the factory for 2 days. And that is another thing that leaders often don't want to do, right? There's this idea that, indeed, like you say, the teams call on Saturday night or Friday night, after work hours, sometimes even, or like, we don't want to invest in, we don't want to make the trade-off of creating really good focus and alignment versus, a potential short-term loss of productivity. Is a trade-off I don't see a lot of companies make. But if you do that and you invest, you actually kind of take people seriously enough to say, actually, we really value your perspective and want to know if this is going to work. Then actually, that kind of commitment, that also drives commitment and creates more commitment.
Yeah. And you're right. We brought up this on a previous episode with Steve Hirschham, and it was about that. You got to slow down to speed up.
Right. Yeah.
No one wants to slow down. They just don't put, and in this thing, when you're talking about strategy activation, that getting people involved, that comes into, a structural sequence. You've got to invest the time and space to do that.
Yeah.
But by doing that, you're going to exponentially speed up because they've got the clarity, got the ownership, and they're going to move forward. But they won't. They'll do it over 5 minutes before, the next meet.
Yeah. And then they're surprised that nothing changed. Right?
Yeah.
I think and this is a really good segue into the Formula One world, because these and this, I know, Mike, but maybe for the listeners, these are fairly large teams. People don't understand that often, but like an average Formula One team is 1,000 to 2,000 people to build and drive 2 cars. It's crazy. I'm still crazy when I'm saying it, but it is true, right? It's like, these cars are manufactured from scratch. Sometimes even they build their own engines. So it's a highly technical environment. It's a big factory environment. And they are the fastest and most innovative teams in the world. And the way they've done that, the way they've been able to compete in this ruthless competitive environment, is by building in moments for pausing, learning, and reflection and improving. So the fastest teams in the world actually have cultivated this idea of continuous improvement and continuous innovation by pre-planning in their operating rhythm, in their way of working. They just schedule reflection meetings. And I sometimes use this metaphor of when they have a race, it's usually about 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit more. But they spend over 2 hours reflecting on how the race went and what they can learn from it.
Yeah.
It's this balance of execution versus reflection and improvement that is very different from what we see in most organizations.
Yes. And when you look at the whole process, like the time they put into it, the approach to strategy, that's really what we mean by when strategy meets reality. Because before the race, they're already thinking and wargaming around what could happen, what would happen to this. You can hear the drivers, they're going, we're going on to plan A. Or plan B, or even some the other day we're talking about plan G. You're like, wow, okay, cool. And then that point afterwards that you never see, people talk about it, but that sort of after action review, that actual time where they're not just going, oh yeah, we could have done better. They're really pulling into the detail, and the drivers are taking ownership. And this, I think, is a real key point. the drivers themselves are taking ownership for, oh yeah, this is my mistake, I've done this, and this is what we're going to learn from. Everyone's there to take ownership of what part they either contributed really well or may have, in part led to some undesirable outcomes.
Exactly. And it's this space where it is safe to admit failure. That actually also helps them to innovate well. There are teams on the grid in the Formula One sport that have a culture where people are a little bit more afraid to speak up, especially if the big gorilla boss is in the room. But the best performing teams, people are constantly just admitting their failures and then thinking about what were all the factors that were contributing to this problem on top of me making a personal mistake, because it's usually more than one person's mistake or one factor that's causing a certain situation. And the teams that understand that well, they, instead of blaming someone for a failure, they look at all the factors and try to make improvements on all of those, because the human factor will always be part of that. So that's what happens in those reviews as well.
Yeah, you see it's definitely a different approach by the different bosses. Probably the polarized one at the moment is I've forgot his name now, the Alpine's boss now, the Italian guy. He was banned for a while. Yeah, I forgot his name.
Yeah, Flavio Briatore.
Yeah, Flavio.
Yeah.
And then you got Wheatley on the other side.
Yeah.
He's just gone
to
Audi.
He's
just gone
Audi.
to.
But he's moving to. Is he moving to Aston Martin now?
Yeah,
no, that wasn't confirmed yet.
But yeah, they're complete polar opposites. You've got Flavio on one side that's like any mistake, he's like slamming doors.
Cut your head off.
yeah. Wheatley on the other side, he's just a nice,
very friendly,
happy, very friendly. And I remember him saying, "Don't confuse my friendliness with or smiliness with not being serious."
Right.
And I think sometimes that does get confused. People are, they're soft. But I don't think he's ever really soft. He just has a bit more of an open approach that invites people to be honest. And I think that's where, he just
it's about creating an environment.
Be honest to him. Yeah, sorry.
I think it's really about as a leader at the top, you set the tone for the culture of everyone else. Like if you bark to your colleagues that report into you, then they will bark to their people as well, because apparently that's how we do things around here, And before you know it, everybody's barking at each other. And like the smart team principals understand that the culture to build is really one of understanding, listening, empathy, but also, yes, and also if you read some of Toto Wolff's interviews, like of course he's very okay with mistakes, but if it's happened 3 or 4 or 5 times, then you're out, right? These Formula One teams are magnets for talent, and they have the ability to hire the best talent in the world. So they will not have a low performer for long. But even with high performers, everybody's going to make a mistake, and it's all about teamwork, and you have to talk to each other and collaborate.
Yeah. I think they have a great balance in there around the, there's that space to be open and admit faults and learn and learn quick. With the other side around, actually, there's accountability, there's ownership.
Exactly.
And you need to own your own area, and I think that highlights really, really crucial to your point about strategy activation and that self alignment. Yeah. That we're going to learn, but the psychological contract I have with you is that you will own your space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've observed also when visiting and researching Formula One teams, that on Monday morning after the Sunday race, they always have this all hands race debrief. Because when they're doing the race, they can only bring about 100 people to the track. That's limited by regulations. But there's always going to be 900 to 1900 people in the factory, hoping that the thing they worked on last week doesn't fall apart during the race. So everybody's interested and engaged to understand on Monday, okay, we now had this race. What does that mean for me? So what you see is that there's multiple photos of this where it's like you have the team principal in front of the group. And this is this town hall meeting where they're going to talk through all the learnings of the race, but it also immediately gives everybody a perspective of what does that mean for my priorities up until the next race. Yeah. So imagine they're focusing on improving issues with the start, and this is something between the electronics team and the power unit team. Everybody understands that's now the biggest bottleneck for performance. Everybody now know that they need to leave those teams alone, in the next 2 weeks, and don't bother them with some kind of new ideas. So at the end of the meeting, everybody walks out and say, now I kind of already know with that context what it means for me and the priorities of my team for the next 2 weeks. And this is this rapid self-alignment that's happening. And this is done with everyone in the room. It's not only done through the management layer. Everybody's there to hear the full story. They're able to ask questions and push back on things immediately. And that's this 2-weekly self-alignment that's happening.
Yeah. And it's great seeing, I see it all the time. Red Bull used to do it a lot. They still do. Every Monday, the team principal will be at the factory in Milton Keynes, and they do it. But you mentioned a really good point there and around everyone understands what the main priorities are, and we talk about the main effort. So when we think about strategy execution, there is a main effort, which is the most crucial part that must happen to enable success for everything else, and everyone knows that, and you focus in on it. I rarely see it though, because they live in this world of priorities, and everything's a priority, and then everyone's squabbling for resources.
Yeah, I wrote this in my book and actually found this in my research that I think before the 1930s, priorities as a plural didn't exist. As a word, it doesn't exist like there was only one priority. That's how it worked. Yeah. And so somehow we kind of we introduced multitasking in our vocabulary. Yeah, it's crazy how many people still believe that we need to do 5 projects at once rather than doing each one in sequence and just finishing them.
Yeah.
We think we're faster by doing everything in parallel, but we're not. It's slower.
No, and that's the thing. When you especially when you're doing change, you've got to sequence that, because we've only got so many limited resources and time. You need to sequence them, and also a lot of things do follow an actual sequence. And you can base that, and you always sequence based off of constraints and resources.
Yeah.
Things will have an actual sequence, but we seem to not want to do that. I don't know why. Maybe it's this thing of this false sense of speed, or sometimes I've seen it that people don't want to say that something's the priority because that'll upset Dave or Shelley because they're not the priority. You're like, oh God. Yeah.
I would say the other thing I see often is that we've hired too many people. We have too many people at once trying to do something. And that means we have to kind of break down the work into different departments. And now suddenly all those departments are competing for the same resource. While if we would have just a smaller team, you see this in scale-ups, right? They cannot do everything. They have to just focus on a few things because they just simply cannot do everything. But now that we have 1,000 people, we should be able to do everything, right? At least that's the expectation. But like this bit weird metaphor that is shown a lot in software development is like you cannot have a baby in 1 month with 9 wives.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. It's just a process that takes time. And somehow in business we sometimes think that we can.
Yeah, and you see all the time. Stafford Beer called it pathological autopoiesis. It's that thing where teams then come, or organizations come almost internalized, and they come self-creating. So they lose touch with reality, and and essentially that's what causes the bulge. And you get all these teams that bulge out. But when you actually pull it apart and you say to these teams, and I often do, like, what do you do? And it's amazing how detached people and teams get from what's actually happening. And you think that's where you've lost it.
The moment you start growing a lot, and if you don't have your team structures well thought out, you get a high level of internal focus. Where we have to go through management layers to get something done, especially when there's dependencies. It is not a problem to have a large amount of teams, but you have to think about, first of all, making them cross-functional, thinking about what is actually the process of delivering value in this particular organization, and how can we separate smaller teams that are able to deliver end-to-end without any dependency on a certain domain. And if you're able to kind of have that in place, well, then you can go fast and maybe making parallelization is then possible. But unfortunately we do tend to think that if we put all the specialists of one craftsmanship in one team, or we have this matrix organization that drives everybody crazy, it's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. But going back to what I do on stage often when I talk to audiences, I show them a pit stop. You see 22 people doing one thing at once. Everybody has their own little task. It's all synchronized. Everybody knows what to do. There's no meetings involved. during the pit stop. How are we going to approach this? It's clear. Like, the work is clear, the product is clear, everybody has their role in it, and we can just do something in 2 seconds. And that's
that's why I'm concerned where things are going with people in organizations. It's almost like it's not vogue, to actually have role clarity anymore or structure. That everyone's anti-structure and anti-thing. And you're like, no, there's a difference. You see it all the time because people will, especially on LinkedIn, they'll show like the picture with the normal traditional tree, and then this like networked mess. And they go, yeah, bad, good. Like, no. You could have a network thing and still be really bad. But
yeah, exactly.
I think people are lost going back to the basics around, what is this thing for? What do we need it to produce? And then thinking about, well, how do we give it all the decision rights and resources so this thing can just do what it needs to do and adapt to the turbulence it's going to have without needing to stop and ask permission for everything, have meetings, slow everything down, which then really destroys any idea of strategy execution.
Yeah, sometimes it's interesting to just map out the value chain on the wall, to kind of interview a group of people, like how do we actually produce this thing? How do we actually create value for our customers? What is the product, and how do we create this product? And you kind of map out all the steps, starting with approval here, budget there, meeting this and that, priority setting, and then so how long is actually the lead time? What's the time to market here? And if that's something you start steering on, how fast are we able to adapt to the market, and you make that visible, then things becomes obvious. But it's often that leaders think their organization is really efficient until you make visible that they really aren't.
Yeah.
It's like it's difficult because these things are not visible on a balance sheet. The CFO doesn't know how many time we're wasting in meetings that are useless. That's not being tracked often, and it's not being steered on. But costs are like how many employees we have, how many money we're spending, how many budgets we're allocating. Those are things that are tracked, but not the actual things that are blocking strategy execution, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, that comes to another counter problem where people track the cost by heads. So they think, well, let's be more efficient, so we'll just cut heads rather than understand what those heads do. And before you knew it, they've crushed any sort of adaptability in there. Because they've now overextended their workforce. So there's always that bit. That's where we're talking about. You need to be curious and to actually understand. I keep saying this, and I said it in my previous solo one. I was talking about we need to start with reality. Like, what's the reality of the situation? What is it that we actually do? What is actually happening? And I've done that with an organization. I said, well, tell me, how does someone get the notice for work to deliver the work? And their process looked great. And I said, right, let's go see reality and go track it. And they were amazed but how difficult it was to get notice of work, to get to do work. Was really so much shock for them. I've started looking into the case study of Nokia, the mobile phones in the 90s and 90s that were once a market leader. It's a famous example of failure, I guess, of the iPhone is coming and then suddenly Nokia is gone. But if you look at that really closely, what you discover is that it's not that the top leaders didn't know what was coming for them. They were completely aware. Like a day after the iPhone announcement, their strategy department had created an amazing report, which is public, about how this is going to impact their business, how Nokia should respond, potential scenarios for responding to this, choices to make. Like that was super clear to the top one day after the iPhone announcement. But then the problem started. How do you get a company that is stuck in their silos, that is stuck in a certain way of producing these phones, to completely steer away from that? And especially the integration between software and hardware, that was something that was completely separated in this company. And now it suddenly had to be key to integrate that design. The silos, the incentives were working against them. They're like all this inertia completely created the failure that we're looking at. They just disappeared in a few years. And that's the problem with, I always talk about you have strategy, but you have the identity, the grand strategy, which is, what is the organization? What's it good at? What's the DNA of it, the capabilities, because it limits what's possible for the strategy. And if you're so if you got what Boyd talks about, this incestuous amplification, where you're so internal, so much bureaucracy, so slow, then it removes any ability to be able to adapt to seize those opportunities. You see all the time it happen with blockbusters. You could argue that this is essentially what happened with Novo Nordisk. With they created the first to market with the fat loss drug, but they weren't set up for mass production. So then others came quickly and they took it. So they've had to. I think they've made 9,000 employees redundant, which is huge. But this answers another question. Like, now they've done this, do they know what they're going to become? And they're going to be happy what they become?
Right.
Because they doing that much of a change is going to fundamentally change the identity of an organization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they have to kind of reset themselves, start from scratch, basically, thinking about what kind of company are we? Are we producing insulin, or are we producing a consumer-facing brand? It's a totally different story.
Yeah. But no doubt they'll get some consultants in that will do them a lovely new purpose statement, a vision statement that's completely detached from reality.
I think it's more than that, actually. We've actually been in conversations to help them out, funny enough, and it's all about changing behavior on the ground. If you are and this is not only for Novo Nordisk. I think this is a development in pharma that's happening in multiple places, where the pharmaceutical companies would have been able for years to just consistently produce great profit margins because their drugs were just monopolizing, and now there's just more competition. Consumers are getting more involved in picking which drugs they want. That's a different, like the consumers gets the voice as well. So this is all about what part of reality are we interfacing with. Suddenly we need to influence behavior of consumers rather than just the healthcare providers, and that's a big shift in many pharma companies that we see a lot. So again, it's like, where are we touching reality, and is that information really that has surfaced at that touch point integrated into how we're going to learn about how we need to be different? And if that takes 5 years to make that shift, that's too long.
But this is the point with the external environment. It's so crucial. A lot of strategy development, even execution, is all internalized. They're not really thinking about the external environment, what's changing, what's happening. And you see this a lot. You've seen it a lot with the third sector market in America, with Trump coming in, all the charities. And he even said, I'm going to cut, USAID. He was pretty clear with it. They sort of just, like rabbits in the headlight, just stopped and stared and hoping it wasn't going to happen. But you've got to look at these, and coming back to the Formula One analogy, you've got to start wargaming this. And thinking, what's our relationship currently? Where is the external environment going? How would that shape us? What can we do to shape it? What are options? And start to think about those.
Yeah, it's a very old practice, actually. It's been invented decades ago, of scenario planning. Right? If you think about these strengths and weaknesses, what's a potential scenario that can really throw us off, and what's a potential scenario that actually can benefit a lot, and what are responses to that, and thinking about that upfront, so that when they are happening, you can actually respond quickly. It's like you said, like the driver is hearing, are we going for plan A, plan B, plan C? Those are all, like, there's a couple hundred scenarios that the teams have figured out before to respond in the actual moment of the race, because they can plan all they want, but they win the race by responding to their competitors at the right time and doing something that's slightly different. So they have computers and computer simulations for this, but being prepared for battle is something we often skip in organizations. So for some reason,
you see it a lot. Like, I admire Hannah Schmidt, who's the Red Bull strategist. And, I had the pleasure of actually meeting her and having a conversation. And it was so interesting about how they do it. But they're always thinking, it's always, they're always thinking about, what if they do this? And then things will happen. They go, right, they are doing this. That means we're ready to go. Or now this has happened. It was unexpected. Well, what does that mean to us? And they're in that dynamic relationship with the external environment, and understanding about how do we shape the environment rather than it shaping us. And you see a lot of organizations that are detached from that, and they are being shaped. They're not shaping.
Right. Yeah. It's all about figuring out, like, what's the hands that I've been dealt, and what are the moves I can make to increase the odds of winning. And it's both of that. It's both being really clear about the hand that you're dealt. And I think I've heard Hannah say that also, like, the strategy for Max Verstappen, the driver, is different from the second driver because they know that Max is able to nurture his tires in a certain way that the other drivers can't. So they can deploy more risky strategies with him. So again, it's like, what do we know about our capabilities? How can we improve those capabilities? But also, how do we work with them every day to figure out, what's our best response to the environment?
Yes. Yeah. That takes a really sort of a grounded approach. And I always get challenged for my sort of attack on ambition. Well, they accuse me of attacking ambition. I'm not, but I'm against blind aspiration. And you see this if you look at the Formula One. What we were just talking about then. You imagine if they'd done what most organisations do, where it's going to go, well, what do we want to do this race? Well, we want to be the best. Yeah. We want to win. We want to be the best on the track. And then they're just like, okay, cool. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go really fast. As one priority. We're going to have great technology. We're going to delight our fans.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really about it. And then
that's the strategy.
Yeah, it's a strategy.
That's a really good. That's an amazing metaphor. I'm gonna steal that from you, Mike. It's a really good example of the strategy you see often. I think if you look at the actual strategies and the conversations, especially happening in the midfield, they say, if we are going to finish 5th this year, we've done amazing. So that's what we're going to aim at. They're not going to say we're going to aim for the championship because they know it's not realistic. And if you set a goal that's unrealistic, it only demotivates people. So you have to be clear about that.
And that's where you go into that strategy activation you're talking about, and that's cynicism. Because if it's just broadcasted out and it's just like I said, oh yeah, we're going to be the best amazing thing. It's not even that. They're probably going to say we're going to save the world and be the most diverse team in the world. Is their vision. People look at it and go, one, I don't know how to translate that to what I need to do. And two, you're like, that's unrealistic. You've got someone like Haas are going to turn around and go, Haas are sort of midfield, by the way, and they go, we're going to win the Drivers and Constructors Championship this year.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, well, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't really help. So this is the thing about what is the job to be done for the strategy that we have? How can we make it in a way that it's actually helpful? So one thing that I help leaders do a lot is this: articulate a strategic intent, which is like it's long enough so you can actually be ambitious, but it's short enough so it's actually concrete and tangible. So it's usually on a time horizon of 2 to 4 years, where you articulate, this is the thing that really needs to happen in the next 2 to 4 years for us to survive or to be successful or to be whatever. And because we're planning for 2 or 4 years ahead, you can actually put the bar relatively high. So it is inspiring, but it is not this ultimate thing of we're going to dominate the whole world, because that is too far ahead for people to really grasp. But people can look at that strategy and that goal and think like, I can see how that might be possible if we really focus ourselves. So I'm really of the like stretching is good, but it still has it's only inspirational if it's achievable. It's kind of this paradox, but this idea of 10x and like BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. I mean, it's a matter of how you deal with them, but I found this sweet spot, like 2 to 4 years out is far enough, because people overestimate what they can do in a year, but they underestimate what they can do in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because in the word intent, that we use that in the military, and it's very clear, focused. Do what by means of how. And the final bit is what success will look like. So all we say, when the smoke clears, what's going to be meaningfully different, so that people understand it. But we think about trajectory. I think the trajectory, what's the direction we're going? What's the next sort of horizon that we need to think about, and what that look like? Because I think these sort of it's sort of extremes. You get one that's like we're pretty much going to do what we did last year, plus or minus 10%, or it's so vague, like we're going to be the best selling thing, or it's not helpful for anyone.
The thing that also really helps with this is practice that I really am a huge fan of, which is even overstatements. So For example, we're going to apply the trade-off of speed even over cost,
Mm.
or volume even over product diversification. So it's really all about articulating a trade-off so that it's extremely clear what you're willing to not do to achieve the
Yeah.
other thing. And that's something that's often very missing. Like, it's like, this is the goal, but to get to that goal, we have to say no to certain things.
Yeah. They
And
want both.
do the work of figuring out what we need to sacrifice.
Yeah.
What we're really not going to do to get there.
Yeah, it's the same with NetRail in the UK. They've always struggled with trying to pick either performance or capacity.
Which
You
one?
know,
Which
one-
company? Sorry?
Network Rail.
Network Rail, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
so they own
performance or
the-
capacity. Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So performance or capacity. So we know that if you've got a lot of trains on the network, it's going to impact performance.
Yeah.
So, but they won't. Sometimes some will be clear, but some won't be clear about what's the trade-off, what we're actually going
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
And so they sit in this sort of middle where they don't
Yeah.
really achieve either or. Yeah.
And the funny thing is that if you are able to get performance, sometimes you get the second half of the even over statement as a bonus by just focusing on one a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if things are high performant, then that actually maybe allows you to increase capacity and volume, But if we don't choose, the universe will choose for us, which is obviously often a middle average ground that is not useful for anyone.
Yeah. But this is something really good to highlight in the dialogue that you have. And like, this is what I want. What's the contradiction? Yeah. And they'll come and they'll say, well, if you want this, then
What can we
need
not
to
do?
sacrifice that. Yeah. And you go, yeah, that's cool. But this is where we must be clear about the constraints. What's the freedoms? What's the implied specified tasks? Have that time to have that dialogue. Otherwise, strategy will just falter. It will not happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like it. So what do you think, looking ahead now, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for organizations in this sort of strategy field going forward?
Another $1 million question, Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing that we consistently see clients struggle with is this focus. It's just too many things at once. There's too many inputs, too many ideas. AI is accelerating the amount of ideas that people have, which is on the one hand great, but how do you create those decision filters so you actually can focus? And that all, it starts with almost individual hygiene in terms of, can I actually do my work every day without feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah.
And really equipping your employees with that. And then, can I equip my colleagues, my employees, with enough strategic clarity so they can actually make those choices in a beneficial way, rather than just whoever shouts the loudest gets most attention, or the client that shouts the loudest, or the problem that seems the biggest. And I think that is the challenge. How do you give people a compass that they can put in their own pocket, that they can help navigate actual day-to-day change and day-to-day overwhelm? That's something I think is true for many places.
Yeah. I believe that focus, and it's not a new thing.
No.
We talk about it for centuries.
But it's different. It was different in the 1980s when we didn't even have email.
Yeah.
40 years later, we are overwhelming people with not only email but all other sorts of communication apps and WhatsApp groups and then news and everything that's happening in people's personal lives, and it is overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah. Organizations, I think, need to get to the point where they realize that having a bit of inefficiency built in is not a bad thing. Like, have a bit of slack.
Exactly.
And to be really honest, and this is like to the CFOs and stuff like that, it's not a good thing that your workforce are at 120% capacity. That's not a good thing.
I always tell them, like, what does a highway look like when they're at 100% capacity?
Yeah.
It's a traffic jam.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
I know, but we seem to get in this thing where it's all about efficiency, and it's about and the thing. This is where you can think about in Formula One, the pit stop. That is about efficiency, but it's stable. It doesn't change, except for you may get a lock-in nut that wasn't come undone. But it's a very closed system.
Yep.
You come in and you can make that thing as efficient as possible. That's why they've gone from back in the 80s. It used to be like 2 minutes for a stop.
Yeah.
All the way
Yeah.
to now, it's 2 seconds for a
Exactly.
stop.
Yeah.
But you can't apply that same process to everything. And I think
No,
we do. Because
exactly.
there are things that just are not stable or closed enough to be able to do that. You need to have slack in the system to adapt.
And you have to understand that people's brains are not wired to be productive every hour of the work week, right? Like social cohesion, having people to talk with their colleagues, interact, have a drink, or have a really good human to human conversations is actually the oil in the system. If you overload people with work or with priorities, then you're not getting the most out of them. I think that there's lots of leaders out there that really understand that. Like, I'm not saying that the leaders don't get it, but somehow especially if you have a company that's stock listed, creates a quarter-to-quarter focus, that kind of trickles down sometimes in the culture, that there's no time for chat or for pausing or for reflection or for improvement. Like, it feels like everything is already fully loaded to the top. But yeah, you have to figure out as an executive team, like, what kind of culture do you really want? Does it have a short-term perspective? Does it have a long-term perspective? What kind of employer do you want to be? Those are the big questions for the executives. Yeah.
And they've got to match that with structure. And I think that's what happens, because you've got a lot of good leaders out there, but the structure is not designed for that. So they become a part of the system, get dragged to it. Yeah, it's been really great. Fantastic conversation. I can't believe it's come to time already. But before you leave, what would you like to leave listeners to think about from this episode?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that we haven't mentioned that is also key to good strategy execution, is that we tend to think that decisions are irreversible. We tend to act as if we're going to make one strategic decision a year because we don't want to change the strategy too often. We should really let go of that idea. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect. It's all about doing stuff to see how reality responds, learning from that, and then doing new decisions, rather than having meeting after meeting after meeting to make the perfect decision, which in reality doesn't really exist. So I think this reversibility of decisions is also kind of a key element in my latest The Unblock book that I mentioned before, where it's like, how do you do that in practice? How do you actually get to more experimentation rather than more perfect decisions that are not really perfect?
Yes. I would say that strategy is the gap that never closes. When you go execution, it's never going to meet reality how you want to.
Right.
So you're never going to have that perfect one where it executes smoothly. There's always going to be a gap that needs to be closed through. And again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier about those teams that are self-organizing. They've got the resources, decision rights. Because they're then equipped to close those gaps without needing to have further meetings. So I think that's a great point for listeners to think about and to connect with. Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been absolutely fascinating. I will link your books, LinkedIn, people want to get in touch. If you've enjoyed the episode as much as I have, having a great conversation, Jurriaan, please subscribe and share to your network so other people can get value from this. But thank you so much for being a great guest.
Thank you.
There's a lot of great insights for people to think about.
Thanks very much, Mike. I really enjoyed it, and we'll meet again, I'm sure.